Okay, I think we're live.
We are now live.
And this is Senate Health and Welfare back on January 19th. And we have a new bill in front of us, H1, which is exciting. This is the first bill that we've been looking at. We've been taking so much testimony on background information. It's great to actually look at some language. So Katie, thank you for being here. And why don't you just go ahead and give us a little bit of the historical development and then the bill itself.
Yes, absolutely. Katie McGlynn, Office of Legislative Counsel for the record. So we are looking at H1 today. Just so you know where H1 is in the process, it has already moved through the House. So the House Committee on Human Services voted it out. It was on the floor for second and third reading on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. It is currently being processed, so you don't have the as passed House version, but they made one tiny change, so it shouldn't be problematic for looking at it today. And it will be coming to this committee. I think it'll probably be assigned here when the Senate floor meets today. So that's where H1 is in the process. In terms of how we got here and what the act is, it's really an act to correct a mistake. So we'll be looking at the act and the mistake that it's trying to correct. But before I do that, the chair had asked that I go through the bill that was passed by this committee, by the whole body, but including this committee, last biennium. That's Act 186, an act relating to the system of care for individuals with developmental disabilities. So I was asked to kind of give a high level section by section of what's in the bill. I'll skip over the section with a mistake for now because we'll be coming back to it in more detail. And I can talk you through the mistake that was made and the correction that's being made in H1. So I think I need to share my screen.
Please, my iPad is absolutely non-existent right now. I have to get it replaced.
Okay.
You know what?
I need something devastating. I started last night.
Do we have it on the screen? Great. Okay. So the first section was a legislative intent section, which is important, but I'm not going to read through that particular section. For the new members, legislative intent is aspirational language. It gives guidance about what the legislature's intent is in passing this piece of legislation, but it is intent language, so it's not binding the way a statutory section would be that requires something. This is, again, aspirational. So section 2 deals with a system of care plan. So what are we talking about? There is a Developmental Disabilities Act, and that is how determinations are made about services that go to individuals with developmental disabilities. Every 3 years, the Department of Disabilities, Aging and Independent Living has to update this plan that talks about what the eligibility is for services, how wait lists work for services. At maybe 10 years ago, there was a concern that some aspects of the plan needed more legislative review. So even though there's one plan, certain aspects of the plan were pulled out specifically to go through a rulemaking process. Last year, the General Assembly felt that bifurcating the system of care plan wasn't working. So the language about sending certain portions of the system of care plan through rulemaking were repealed. And so now moving forward, the system of care plan will be more holistically dealt with again, instead of bifurcating those.
When you say bifurcating, where was it sent? What are the two places?
So the department was kind of internally developing the policy and plan for certain aspects of the plan, but then there were certain criteria or that they were pulling out and they were sending through rulemaking. So some was sort of done internally in Dale and some was being reviewed by LCAR and going through more of a public process. So the things that were going through LCAR: priorities for continuation of existing programs or development of new programs, criteria for receiving services or funding, type of services provided, and a process for evaluating and assessing the success of programs. So all important things, none of that is going away. It's all still part of the plan. It just won't go through the rulemaking process.
Bad LCAR.
And then Another portion of this bill, there was a concern last year that the system of care plan wasn't being delivered on a 3-year schedule. And what is the process that the department should follow if they are not going to be able to keep up with that 3-year schedule? So this subsection F puts in place a process for the department to request an extension and get approval from the committee chairs if their plan is going to be late. So that is a system of care plan. Next, quality services review. So this is a series of 2 reports that look at what the requirements are for a review where somebody would go into a facility, for example, or review the services that an individual with developmental disabilities is receiving. So the first report, I think you've received both of them now. The first report was due in November. This was identifying the current level of quality service reviews required by the department, meaning Dale, for home and community-based services that were provided by the designated and specialized service agencies. The second portion of this was identifying current requirements for the designated and specialized service agencies and other providers to perform on-site visits to individuals with developmental disability receiving Medicaid funding for residential services. And then it goes on to list the type of residential services. There's a second report that I believe you have received at this point. And this was a request for Dale to kind of come up with a plan for making sure that there is a quality review of services each year. The testimony the committees received last year is that review of services, like somebody physically going in and taking a look and evaluating the services, wasn't happening each year. So this is a plan to make sure that happens. Section 4 was creating a new time-limited position. This position is the residential program developer, and this person would specifically be focused on the population of individuals with developmental disabilities, generating how to generate more housing options for this population, looking for possible grants to expand housing, trying to navigate housing like on a one-on-one basis with individuals who are seeking housing. So that is what section 4 did. There's an appropriation for that for the fiscal year for that position. And I think it's an ongoing position for a couple of years. So you'll probably see that that is brought to you again to continue that position. Section 5 is pilot planning grants. So the idea behind this, again, is looking at the development of housing and residential options for individuals with developmental disabilities. The idea is to set up eventually pilots for this purpose. This section doesn't begin the pilot program, but it does is appropriate some money and provide some guidelines for planning for what the pilots will look like. And there is a steering committee that's part of this section that is to provide guidance and direction to the department and setting up what these pilots would look like. Section 6 is the section that we will be coming back to. This is where the error was. This is payment reform and conflict-free case management. So I'm just going to flag that and pass over it for the moment. Next, in section 7, home and community-based spending plan. This is a direction to AHS to amend its home and community-based service spending plan so that a certain pot of federal money could be used for both the residential coordinator position that we just talked about and the pilot planning grants. And I believe that's it, and then the effective dates. So that was the act itself. Okay, let me switch documents here.
Any questions around that? I mean, it was not an easy bill to complete. There were a lot of advocacy coming in, and the department or the agency representing itself. So it took some time, but I think we landed in a very good place. So yeah, very helpful.
So now, moving to where I made the error.
I don't think there's any, look at, there's no blame in this one. It's
Oh, that's
language.
very nice of you to say.
I
So the committee, there were two versions of the bill. There was a House version of the bill and a Senate version of the bill, as often happens. There was a determination to go to a conference committee. And so there were 3 members of the Senate, 3 members of the House on the conference committee, and everyone agreed that the version of section 6 that they wanted in the bill was the Senate version of section 6.
Yes.
So there's no debate about that. That was agreed to. However, the lead-in language I used talked about receding from the Senate proposal instead of exceeding. So it was a one-word mistake, but it had big implications because what that meant was that the House version of section 6 is what went into the final act. So what H1 does is it repeals section 6 in the bill, which is the House version of section 6, and instead it puts in the exact language of section 6 from the Senate version of the bill. So in terms of looking and comparing those two sections.
Committee faux pas, that's all.
So these are the 2 versions of section 6. Do we have it? Yeah, no. There we go. Okay.
Can you make it bigger?
Oh, let's see. Oops, is that too big?
No, it didn't.
There it goes.
Okay,
That's fine.
That's good.
okay.
Yeah.
So just to give you an overview, you'll see that these are both about the same topic. Looking at payment reform, system-wide payment reform for services to individuals with developmental disabilities, and also federally required conflict-free case management and the review of that. So both sections deal with that. The major difference between the 2 sections is that the House version required approval from the General Assembly of these plans that the department was coming up with that pertained to payment reform and conflict-free case management. Whereas the Senate version asked the department to come in and make a presentation and seek input from the standing committees. So the difference is legislative oversight approval versus having input. So that is the major difference in terms of the substance of what Dale is looking at for payment reform and conflict-free case management. That is the same. It's just the legislative oversight piece. If you'd like, I can go through these 2 in more detail, or I could just bring you to H1.
There are 2 things that would be helpful.
Mhm.
Define conflict-free case management,
Sure.
and then, and maybe, I mean, you can go, obviously, you should probably go through
Both of
then
them.
what we're approving.
Yep.
And then, what's the other one? Oh, that's good for now. Come back.
Okay.
I was gonna say go through the how a conference committee works, but let's hold that thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
Conflict-free case management, trying to turn my brain back to last year. So
Yeah.
the idea is that the entity that is providing services shouldn't also be the entity that's making determinations about what services and how well the services are being provided.
So, yeah, so it's a matter of the fox guarding the hen house.
Yeah.
Right.
So why don't I just read through both of these sections with you so you have a sense. So first, the House passed version says, prior to implementing the system-wide payment reform impacting individuals with developmental disabilities, their families, DAs, and SSAs, the department is to seek approval from the General Assembly. So that is the language that is different from the Senate version.
And so if that were in place, then what would that involve for the plan to be approved?
So that's something we talked about, that this
Yeah.
was an H bill, it went through the House first, and when it got to the Senate, that was a big part of the conversation.
No, I mean,
Oh.
but what would be the process if the House language went through?
Right,
What would the process be?
yeah, so that is the conversation we had when it got to this committee, because it doesn't spell out what General Assembly approval means. Does it mean there's a bill approving it? Does it mean the subject committees are, or the standing committees are approving it. So I think that was part of the reason why the move was made to the Senate language. So with regard to the payment reform, specifically, the department has to look at the following. So in addition to any standardized assessment utilized by the department, a process for considering additional information relevant to the life circumstances of service recipients and applicants. So you'll see in all three of these, it sort of directs looking at the individualized person receiving services. In subdivision 2, in addition to any standardized rates or rate ranges developed by the department, a process for consideration of budgets to reflect the individualized support needs of service recipients or applicants. And in subdivision 3, a process for evaluating the fiscal and service impact of individual service recipients and the designated and specialized service agencies. Subsection B deals with the conflict-free case management, and this says prior to implementing federally required conflict-free case management system, the department shall seek to consider input from a variety of stakeholders. It lists the stakeholders, and then at the very end it says, and seek approval from the General Assembly. So again, that's the language that's changing. And then as part of the changes necessary to come into federal compliance, consideration given to performing initial clinical eligibility and service planning within the department. So that's the House version. That's what is enacted and what would be repealed. And then, you know, why don't I just show you, I'll flip to H1, which has the Senate language
Yeah,
in it.
let me do that.
Okay, so this, do you have it? Yes. So this appears as the bill is introduced. We know that there's already been House action, and if you choose to move forward on this, the version you'll see will have capital letters at the top that says as passed House. So that's the version you're going to see when you officially get it.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
When we officially get it, will it be pinned up on the board?
It's right there.
That is it right there?
Well, that's the
Oh, that's
companion
H2,
bill.
that's ours. Well, we have H1.
It hasn't come to you
We
yet.
haven't gotten it yet.
I think you'll get it on the Senate floor today. It'll
Today.
be referred, yeah.
And then it will be,
That'll be right up there.
got it.
Because we're turning this around so fast, the drafting office hasn't even had a chance to process it yet. I just got an email that they're just getting to it. So so you'll have the clean version tomorrow. Okay. So maybe it's helpful. Tell me if this wouldn't be helpful. I know this is the first bill you're working on, so maybe I'll go through sort of the sections of the bill that I wouldn't ordinarily guess. Okay. So we have the subject of the bill. You'll notice it usually starts with like the broadest category possible, human services, and we get smaller and smaller. So developmental disabilities, payment reform, conflict-free case management. The statement of the purpose of bill is introduced. This is just a factual statement of what the bill does. So we're replacing legislative approval with legislative oversight for these two programs, payment reform, conflict-free case management. We have a title of the bill. I see you have a question. Should I pause?
No, you're good.
Oh, can I ask a question?
Yeah, no, interrupt for this.
Okay,
This is
okay.
important. It's our first bill. Go
Okay.
through, and you should be clear about.
I'm assuming that the move away from approval to oversight is just to keep things moving and not bogging everything down and slowing it down. Is that correct? Or?
That's potentially part of it. I think part of it was probably also what do we mean by legislative approval? Do we
Just
mean
not
a bill?
knowing.
And
Okay,
it definitely streamlines the purpose if Dale is coming in and getting your input and recommendations versus having to have your approval. That's maybe.
If every plan that was put together after post legislation, now we asked them to plan out and implement. That's the job of the administration. If we had every single one of those coming back to us, that's all we would spend our time on.
Right.
But so to have a report back about what's going on and what the plan is, then we can give feedback. And if there's if there's necessity, then we can say, oh, wow, we have to put a bill in on this. But overall, there's so much work that goes into something like that plan. It's,
If I may,
Go ahead.
there was
Yeah,
also
please.
there was a long conversation about sort of the role of the executive branch versus the role of the legislative branch, and what is our proper role in terms of oversight and sort of check-ins versus
Doing it.
allowing the executive branch to do their job. So let's just say the executive branch was very uncomfortable with the language that was in the House version of the bill, to say the least. And so this was a bill that was very important to us to pass, and we wanted it to be signed by the governor. And so we wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with how this language ended up so that the bill could move forward.
Got it.
So it was a little uncomfortable that this was the bill that was in here.
So it's sort of a little bit of like governance versus operations.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
there, and to be fair, we heard a lot of testimony from people in the community that were very concerned with how this system was being overseen. And they were, there were some not good stories about it. So there was this level of, we want to make sure it's being done appropriately. And that's why I think the House was very interested in having it come back to the legislature, so we could have some kind of oversight to make sure that it was being done well, because literally people's lives are at stake. So there was a lot of, emotion attached to it and urgency attached to it and concerns. And then we got into the whole conversation about the division of, the executive branch versus the legislative branch. So it was, and that's why the bill went to conference committee.
Yeah.
That was it. It
Yeah,
really was.
And I was on the conference committee and I did not catch the error. So it was all about, there were 6 of us who went through it, didn't catch it. So it was on us.
And that was probably. in
Always
April-
on the
April or
legislative-
It was in May, it was
Yeah.
the last week of the session, it was, a really busy time.
Yeah, and the thing is, when you are on a conference committee and you sign off, it's your responsibility.
Yeah, I literally remember signing the thing
Ditto.
and not, not
You're
having
off the hook.
caught the error.
Right.
Yeah, it's
No,
not.
I don't think so.
Yeah, no,
It was
she-
us, the buck stopped with us and we didn't catch the error,
Yeah.
so.
So, but thank you, Senator Hardy has expressed it extremely well, and when I said fox guarding the hen house, that really was the debate in the community. And they were very concerned about that, so, yeah, so this is a technical correction.
Yeah.
This is a technical correction. Yes, sir.
So what's on the board right now, is that the actual bill, H1?
This is H1,
Okay, so
yes.
I don't have it in my hand.
We don't have it
Yeah,
yet.
it's not.
It's still over,
Okay.
and it's on its way.
I'm
It's
playing
on-
catch up.
You'll
And
have
we'll
it,
get it. We'll
you'll
get
have it this afternoon. Okay, so this section 1 of the bill is the Senate version of the language. The only difference is the title. You'll see on line 16, semicolon, legislative oversight. I just added that to be clear that it's different than the section that we're repealing. I thought if the 2 titles were slightly different, it might be a little bit clearer, but otherwise the language is identical. The House made one small change, and I will point it out to you when we get to that section. So the Senate language, at a minimum, the following shall be included in the payment reform process impacting individuals with developmental disabilities, their families, and designated and specialized service agencies. First, in addition to any standardized assessment utilized by Dale, a process for consideration of additional information relevant to the life circumstances of service recipients or applicants. You'll start to see this is very similar to the House language. In addition to any standardized rates or rate ranges developed by the department, a process for consideration of budgets to reflect the individualized support needs of service recipients or applicants. And subdivision 3, a process for evaluating the fiscal and service impact on individual service recipients and designated and specialized service agencies. You'll see there's nothing about oversight or approval in subsection A. Everything has been moved to subsection C. So B is our language about conflict-free case management. The department shall seek and consider input from a variety of stakeholders, including individuals with developmental disabilities, their families, designated and specialized service agencies, and other providers and advocates. As part of the changes necessary to come into federal compliance, consideration shall be given to performing initial clinical eligibility and service planning within the department. Same language that we just saw for the
Standard
house.
way of
And how would they do that? To reach out to the people affected with disabilities and their families?
The members might have some thoughts, but there are a lot of advocacy organizations, so I imagine they would tap into that network to make
Yeah.
sure their plan is going out and that they're getting feedback.
Yeah, the Vermont Center for Independent Living, Vermont Legal Aid, and there are a number of other folks who would be engaged.
Green Mountain South
We will
Advocates.
certainly hear from them.
Yes.
So you'll get to know them well. They'll come in and talk with us.
And we're gonna have legal aid come in, I think next week they're coming in.
So the crux of the change is the subsection C, on or before February 1st, 2023. That's the change that the House made. Dale came in, so House Human Services, and they asked that it be 2024. So the House approved that. So that is the change, 2023 to 2024. On or before
But
February.
it's not there. This is the bill.
This is the bill is introduced.
Got it.
When you get
Okay.
your version, you'll see
Okay.
that it has been.
Oh, no, not another.
Yes, no, that is the change. On or before February 1, 2024, the department shall present any proposed policy changes related to payment reform and conflict-free case management to the House Committee on Human Services and the Senate Committee on Health and Welfare, and seek and consider input from the committees. So that's sort of the heart of the change.
There it is.
Yep. Section 2 is a repeal section. This is repealing the existing section 6 that was enacted in Act 186. And then we have that it's taking effect on passage. Most bills, you'll notice as you start to see more and more, take effect July 1 of the year that you're in. But this takes effect on passage, so that change can happen right away.
Well, and I think the administration is very interested in having this bill go forward ASAP for a lot of different reasons. But, the date extension for their work, but then also clarity on what oversight we have once there's a plan. We're acting as quickly as possible. In fact, we're acting before we get the bill. We're not acting, but we're certainly learning about it.
And I think we're also, I don't want to speak for you, but we're also trying to, preserve trust too.
Exactly.
Because an error was made, and so we're fixing it. As we sent a letter saying we would fix this
Right.
as soon as possible, so we're following through on that
That's right.
promise.
When did that went out in the summertime?
Yeah, that went out in May.
There's always a lot of work behind the scenes for some of these things, so that's a good one. Katie, thank you. Are there any questions for Katie while she's here? I know it's a bill that you're not familiar with, but it is a content technical correction. It is an important change. Okay, no questions. All right, so we'll go offline for just a few minutes before Mike Fisher comes in.